We arrive here out of many singular rooms, logging on from various screens and locations. We come to be assured that brothers and sisters surround us, even though they remain temporarily at a distance, even though we cannot see them. We come to join our voices in common speaking and singing and praying. We come to rekindle and rediscover our sense of the holy and what is most important and sacred in this life. Here now, we are invited to worship something greater than ourselves in order to find ourselves and find some solace and peace as a result. It is good to be together. Good morning to you all, and welcome to our service here on November 15th here at First Parish Church in Weston. I am Jeff Barz-Snell, the minister here, and we are glad you could take some time to join us this day in our sanctuary that is now our studio. If you are a new viewer, we welcome you and are glad you have checked us out. And if you are a longtime member and friend, we are happy that you have tuned in, be it on a Sunday morning, a Sunday night, or some other time during the week. We continue to miss the blessings that come from being here gathered in body as well as in spirit, and to give thanks and come away renewed. Our participants this day include Jeff Weeding, our organist, Bill Sano, our music director, Kel McKean, our soloist, and Chris and Jane Carlson, who are lighting our chalice for this day. Our service is produced and edited by Mr. Max Hall and Jacob Barz-Snell. Our hymn for this morning was included in the order of service that is available on our website and was emailed out last night. Come, ye thankful people, come. Please rise up wherever you find yourself and hum or sing along with me for a couple verses of Come, Ye Thankful People, Come. Thank you, Carol. I'd now like to call forward Jane and Chris Carlson to light our chalice for this morning.
as we light the chalice today, we find ourselves midway between Election Day and Thanksgiving, midway between a time when the affirmation of our democracy ought to be at its strongest, and at a time when we pause to celebrate and appreciate the bounties and joys which that democracy brings us. But this year in particular finds us in an uncertain place. The uncertainty is due in part to the virulent pandemic, which has exploded across the country once more, casting into high relief the differences between the rich and the poor, the powerful and the powerless in this land of plenty. This uncertainty has been exacerbated by a political situation in which the very foundation of our democracy, our faith in and reliance on the integrity of a voting system in which every American has a voice, continues to be undermined by unsubstantiated claims of fraud and misconduct.
A recent statement by the Unitarian Universalist Association, entitled "How You Use Show Up for Justice and Democracy," said, "We believe each and every person has inherent worth and dignity. We believe pluralism and diversity are sources of incredible richness, and that every community has the right to safety, stability, and freedom. We believe that each person deserves a voice and a vote, and that true democracy is an expression of the agency and self-determination that are an essential part of all of us." In these days leading to Thanksgiving, a time of family, community, and caring for people who are less fortunate than ourselves, we light our chalice as we stand for the democratic principles that affirm and support the inherent rights of all people, people of every race, creed, color, and sexual orientation, rich and poor, powerful and powerless, to justice, to freedom, and to have their votes respected and their voices heard throughout our country. May it be so.
Thank you, Chris and Jane. So we now invite you to participate in a recent tradition here at First Parish Church, forced on by the pandemic, a virtual exchange of peace. We have these incredible pieces of technology in our pockets, on our desks, on our persons, and we accomplish all sorts of amazing things during our lives and weeks with them, but we rarely employ them simply to foster a little bit of goodwill. So take a moment and reach out to people you know from First Parish or from the community via text, email, or phone. Send them a quick text, give them a quick call, shoot them a fast email, and simply say good morning and peace be with you. Say you can't talk long right now because you are actually attending a church, and it's okay if they don't understand or think that's a little strange. Tell them you are participating in a service and wanted to wish them peace and health during this time when so many people are struggling. Thank you, Jeff. Sarah's not here this morning, so it falls to me to do the time for all ages. So any of you who are watching, hello. Yoo-hoo! Hello? I see you. No, really, I do. I can see you. All right, I'm lying. Are you watching, though? I'm looking for younger folks. I'm looking for you. Hello? So here's a question. Have any of you played soccer? I know this is not a soccer ball. It's actually a kickball. It's the only ball I could find right now, because none of us have really been playing much soccer or kickball. Do any of you play soccer? Or have any of you played field hockey? Have any of you done a team sport? I'm sure some of you have, who are watching this right now. Well, imagine going to a game. Imagine having a game and playing a team that you have never played before. And the first half is super competitive. You both are passing and you're kicking, and both of you in the first half score 2 goals. Boom. 2 apiece, 2 all. And then the second half, this team that you've never played before starts getting really rough. They start pushing, and they start pulling on your jersey or uniform or your shirt when the ref's not looking. I'm sure that's never happened to any of you. And they start using crazy words and saying all sorts of ridiculous things. And not only that, their parents and the people on the sidelines on their side of the field are also saying crazy things and yelling at you while you're trying to play this game. They're trying to throw your team off. And then, 60 seconds to go in the game. It's still tied 2-all. Your team scores a goal. Boom. The ball goes flying. And it bounces off the shoulder of one of the opponent teams. It bounces off of the top of the goal rail. It bounces then into the bottom of the goal, and it hits the post and then rolls slowly back outside of the net, back across the line. Your team erupts and cheers. Woohoo! We just won. We just scored. With 30 seconds left, you just scored the winning goal. The other team, though, says timeout. Wait a minute. You didn't score. Your player, actually, they say, your player committed a penalty. They committed a personal foul before they took that shot. And by the way, the ball's not even in the net right now, so how could it be a goal? And not only that, even though everyone saw the ball went into the net, their team is claiming that they never saw that. Their team is saying the ball didn't really go into the net. It was just from how you saw it, from your perspective. It looked like it did, but it really didn't. And many of the people on their side of the field are backing them up, including the coach. So what would you do? What would you do if you were in that position? Well, obviously, you would go to the referee. The guy or the gal wearing the striped shirt and the black hat with the whistle, you'd go to the referee and say, hey, aren't you going to stand up for what just happened? Aren't you going to call what really occurred? Aren't you going to rule on what is true and what was real? And most times this happens. Most times the referee will say what actually occurred and make a decision based on that. But it still can make you feel angry when you see another team not playing fair. Another team who is willing to cheat, lying, misrepresenting what has happened is wrong. It's wrong on a soccer field and on a playing field, and it's wrong in all other parts of life. In fact, it is so wrong and so tempting at times that not lying and not bearing false witness is actually one of the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not bear false witness against one's neighbor. There is this old adage that's not whether you win or lose, but it's how you play the game. In sports and in life, that is very much true. The more people lie, the harder it is to have a decent soccer game or any kind of game on a field. It's hard if the other team is being dishonest. And it turns out the harder it is to have a decent society. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Surely, all of us can agree on that. Thank you, Carol and Jeff. Our reading for this day comes from the Gospel according to Luke in the Christian New Testament. It is from Luke chapter 16. It is the account of the rich man and Lazarus. There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen, and who feasted sumptuously every day. And at his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who longed to satisfy his hunger with what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs would come and lick his sores. The poor man died and was carried away by the angels to be with Abraham. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where he was being tormented, he looked up and he saw Abraham far away, with Lazarus by his side. He called out, "Father Abraham, have mercy on me and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in agony in these flames." But Abraham said, "Child, remember that during your lifetime you received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner evil things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. Besides all this, between you and us is a great chasm that has been fixed, so that those who might want to pass from here to you cannot do so, and no one can cross from there to us." And he said, "Then, Father, I beg you to send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, that he may warn them, so that they will not also come into this place of torment." And Abraham replied, "They have Moses and the prophets. They should listen to them." He said, "No, Father Abraham, but if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent." And he said to them, "If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead." Here ends the reading. Several years ago, there were concerning reports about the well-known ride-sharing company Uber. The now former CEO of Uber was accused of fostering a hostile work environment, especially for female staff members. Travis Kalanick encouraged a work hard, play hard corporate culture that was elitist, sexist, and at times mean-spirited. At least that's what the allegations were. For a long while, he was unapologetic about the reports of his brutish behavior and arrogance. After all, he had built a successful company. At the time, it was reported that one of Mr. Kolnick's heroes was the well-known novelist and philosopher of sorts, Ayn Rand. Apparently, he even had used a photo of Rand's most famous book, The Fountainhead, as his Twitter avatar or headshot. Ayn Rand's philosophy and thinking had deeply influenced the corporate culture at Uber and how Mr. Kolnick had lived his life. For some of us, this suddenly explained a great deal. The Fountainhead was Ayn Rand's first novel. It was published in 1943, and it tells the story of this brilliant architect, Howard Rourke, and his exploits and adventures in getting ahead in this world. Rourke was intended to serve as a model for Ayn Rand's ideals of human excellence and human success. He was a refined individual who would not compromise his principles or his goals. He would rise and fall on his own wits and his ability to focus his energies on advancing his own personal interests and career. And along the way, in the story, he meets a variety of different individuals, many of whom are willing to compromise their values and exploit the resources and interests of others. By the end of the novel, Howard Rourke prevails after years of working in obscurity and is given the contract to design and build the world's tallest skyscraper. It's interesting. The novel anticipated the post-World War II attitudes and optimism that prevailed in this country in the late 40s and 50s and 60s. It is at once a celebration of American individualism and freedom, as well as a criticism of communist societies, ones in which the efforts of each person is intended or are intended to contribute to some sort of collective whole. And while the critics panned the book when it was first published, it caught on and became popular with young Americans and free market enthusiasts around the world. It has never gone out of print. It is a book that seems especially appealing to young adults just setting out in life, especially young men. Its message about the importance of individualism and freedom and personal drive and integrity resonate with many readers. This can be an alluring message, especially for people who believe in unfettered markets and argue that societies work best when they don't just ensure but rather somehow maximize freedom and individual expression. However, there was a more radical ethic or philosophy operating in these books as well. Ayn Rand argued that human beings functioned best and were the most happy when they were acting purely in their own self-interest, as completely as possible. She wrote essays entitled The Virtue of Selfishness and argued that it was morally good to pursue one's own agenda and not be concerned about the effects on society or community that might have. Rand, it turned out, was quite unconventional in her beliefs, asserting even that God and most religion were antithetical to human greatness and individual expression. Now, perhaps it's not surprising that much of her philosophy was inspired by her reading of Frederick Nietzsche, the great 19th century German philosopher, whose radical critique of Western ethics asserted that morality could be determined by individual greatness and not by some common definition of goodness or decency. Nietzsche was a brilliant linguist, as well as a very clever and brilliant philosopher, who believed that we needed to return to the ancient Greek notions of human greatness. He was writing in the 1890s, by the way. It is the great individual, Nietzsche argues, who makes or breaks society, and it is by his success, it's almost always a he, It's by his success that he should be measured as moral or good. Nietzsche thus argued that it was Christianity that inverted this original notion of Greek morality and declared that human greatness was to be obtained in service to others rather than in service to oneself. Regardless of whether or not you agree with this assessment, this sort of philosophical argument taps into this universal tension that we all experience at times as human beings. How do we balance that need to advocate for our own interests with that desire, with that drive to act in service to others on behalf of some greater good? Lest we forget, Nietzsche's notions about human greatness and power have influenced many movements down through the decades, including the Nazi Party in Germany in the 1930s and 40s. When the Nazis talked about the Übermann and the Überrace, they were using Nietzschean ideals and language. Ayn Rand took Nietzsche's philosophy and she applied it in a different direction and used it to develop a wholesale embrace of American free market capitalism, consumerism, and individual achievement. While she rejected religion, she espoused this absolute belief in free markets and laissez-faire capitalism with an almost religious fervor. Indeed, given the cult-like status she enjoyed during the last part of her lifetime, you can make the case that she was leading a distinctly American religious movement. The Church of Radical Individualism, the gospel of selfishness. And this philosophy, this worldview that Rand developed and embraced, was radical in its own way. Government programs that help people were bad. The real heroes of society were the captains of industry and the capitalists who made something new and different and successful. She believed that individuals owed nothing to society except to be successful, and she asserted that a government works best that governs least. It did not matter that Americans in the 1930s were suffering horribly during a Great Depression. It did not matter that most of this suffering was the result of the excesses and subsequent failure of our financial markets, culminating in the crash of 1929. What mattered was freedom and ensuring great individuals could do great things. For Ayn Rand, free market capitalism was infused with moral greatness, and any diminishment of a free market was therefore wrong or incorrect. Rich people, therefore, should not be overly taxed on their incomes. Poor people should not expect those who were successful to bail them out. Everyone should be free to rise or fall on their own efforts and talent. The makers should not have to support the takers. Now, if this description is starting to sound somewhat familiar, there is a reason for that. Many of our most prominent elected leaders and their appointed officials have professed an admiration for Ayn Rand and her novels about great and talented people being somehow held back and misunderstood by the mediocre majority who simply don't understand what is good for America or for themselves. Donald Trump has noted how he was influenced by Ayn Rand's view of society, as has the former Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan. Former Speaker Ryan is actually a longtime admirer of Ayn Rand and was deeply influenced by her philosophy and views. He actually would ask his new staff to read another one of Rand's novels when they began their work for him, the novel Atlas Shrugged. Rand considered that her masterpiece. It is this massive, tome-like, 800-page 800-page-plus novel that tells a convoluted story of the world's industrialists and inventors rejecting the requirements placed on them by society. And Paul Ryan was not alone in people and in leaders who admire this book. Our former Secretary of State and former Exxon CEO, Rex Tillerson, also acknowledged Rand's deep influence on his own life and career. So has Mike Pompeo, the current Secretary of State and former director of the CIA. In addition, many of the recent financial leaders of this country claim Ayn Rand and her belief in unfettered individual ambition as a major influence on their thinking. Alan Greenspan, the former but legendary chairman of the Federal Reserve, is a longtime follower of Ayn Rand. And he was actually part of her extended group of advisors and followers as a young man. That is to say, he knew her personally. I should say that none of this should be particularly controversial or shocking. After all of us have influences on our lives. That is to be expected. But Rand's influence and her ideology is worth pointing out because it appears to be remarkably influential in how one of our country's major parties has developed public policy over the last 30 to 40 years. While I am not going to go into the specifics, I think it is worth noting that long-standing assumptions about government programs and spending are being called into question on the basis of ideology as much as economics. We live in a society that is increasingly unequal, especially now with this pandemic, with the wealthiest 1% of Americans making more and controlling more of our economy than at any time since the 1930s. We live in a society that is increasingly stratified by wealth and class, to say nothing about race. We live in a society where 30 million of our fellow citizens this day do not have health insurance, just over 9% of all Americans. And this is true during a historic pandemic. Imagine trying to live through this time and getting sick and knowing you don't have health insurance. We live in a country where the single biggest reason for personal bankruptcy is medical emergencies, not somehow financial mismanagement. We live in a country in which market thinking and market practices have infiltrated more and more parts of our lives. We live in a country full of vast opportunities, but also significant challenges and impediments. And at this time, and in this space, the leaders of one of our major parties seems dead set on doing two things: on cutting taxes to the wealthiest Americans during a time of a pandemic and fiscal challenge, and attempting to dismantle social programs that make a major difference in the lives of hundreds of millions of Americans, including the Affordable Care Act, which has made a real difference personally in my own family with respect to having pre-existing health conditions. Part of this agenda is driven by a fervent ideology that the market should determine everything, and that those who have been most successful in this country should not have a large obligation to support our society and our nation. Now, there are other perspectives, many of which are inspired by the Jewish and Christian notions of justice and compassion that we have inherited. There is this radical idea that has been espoused down through the centuries that we really do have an obligation, not just to ourselves, but also to our neighbors and to our community. There is a tradition of interpreting the teachings of Jesus in such a way that we are encouraged to help those who are in need. And this and that this sort of value should be reflected in the way we organize not just our personal lives, but our society. There is individual charity, but there is also building a more fair and equitable society. And over the centuries, various interpreters of the Jewish prophets and the teachings of Jesus have argued that those who are capable, those who have ample financial resources really do have a moral obligation to help those who are less fortunate through no fault of their own and find themselves in desperate need. It does not mean giving a non-deserving person a free ride, but it does mean contributing to a society, to a system that promotes human welfare and decency. We heard this morning one of the more well-known biblical passages that deal with this topic, the parable Jesus tells in the Gospel of Luke about Lazarus and the rich man. This is perhaps one of the more influential parables over the last 1900 years, inspiring countless thinkers and artists down through the centuries, from the early church fathers to St. Benedict, to St. Francis of Assisi, to the Jesuits, to the Quakers, and to many other Protestant movements, including our own Unitarian and Universalist movements. This passage, among other things, is one of the few places in the Gospels that actually describes hell, or Hades as it states, as a fiery pit. And the implication of this story is clear. Those with resources have a moral obligation in this life to help those less fortunate than themselves if they can. And they will be judged accordingly if they do not. Along with Jesus' parable of the sheep and the goats near the end of the Gospel of Matthew, this passage has been the basis for much teaching about social ethics and fostering community, especially over the last 300 years. This is apparently a message that people in all ages and during all times need to hear. From ancient Israel to first century Rome, to the Middle Ages, to Victorian England, to 21st century America, there have been wealthy, successful people who have been tempted to assume that they should have little or no obligation for their fellow humanity. They are tempted to assert that the sole measure of success in this world should be their own selfish pursuit of profit and power. Telling the truth and helping others should therefore then have little or no meaning. This is a grave temptation indeed. Perhaps this explains why various religious movements have felt called to respond at times. Western religious traditions would teach us that human beings are by nature self-centered and greedy at times. Yet the path towards salvation and some transcendence in this life involves overcoming those impulses and finding ways to love our neighbors as ourselves. Charles Dickens, who was himself a Unitarian, by the way, wrote a modern-day parable about this once. Perhaps you have all heard of it. It is a quaint story about a 19th century investment banker in Victorian London, a gentleman named Ebenezer Scrooge. There have been, down through the ages, movements that argue that we actually do not have an obligation to one another, that we need not worry about our natural inclination to selfishness. We need not have to look out for other people. We just have to look out for number one, and maybe the ones right around us. And many of these movements gain adherents who want nothing more than to be left off the hook morally and have their consciences assuaged and have their tribe or their group aggrandized. I suppose there is a perennial tension in any human society about how best to live with one another in community, where there exist differences of opinion and differences in wealth and capability and stature. One of the values that we seem to have lost in American society is some recognition and respect for the common good. To even say the phrase sounds Pollyanna-ish to some. And yet the virtue of serving some semblance of the common good has been a part of our society's values and aspirations for a very long time. The scholar and commentator and former Labor Secretary Robert Reich laments this decline in our sense of the common good in his recent book, By That Very Name. We here at First Parish are reading Professor Reich's book this month as part of our book group that meets on the third Thursday of each month. He observes in his introduction to this book, starting in the 1970s, Americans began talking less about the common good and more about self-aggrandizement. This shift is the hallmark of our era. From the greatest generation, he writes, to the me generation. From we are all in this together to you are on your own. Robert Reich goes on to state that the people of the United States need to have a renewed discussion of the good, as he says, of the good that we have in common, what has happened to it, and how we can restore it. How can we get back to a common belief in the principles of democracy, civility, and opportunity that are at the heart of the American project? I believe we are capable of renewing our democracy, but that involves fostering our sense of fairness, listening to those different from ourselves, and resisting the impulse to demonize and to blame. These values matter more than pure, unfettered free markets. These values matter more than making a profit at any cost. In the end, these are not just political and economic questions and issues, but rather they are moral ones. What responsibilities and obligations do I have to support my country, my society, and its well-being? What obligation am I under to help those who are less fortunate than me? Some of us would argue that those who have been blessed with the resources and the talents and the skills, those of us who have disproportionately benefited from the stable infrastructure and the racial and class privilege over the last 40 to 50 years, those of us who find ourselves in those beneficent categories have some obligation to help those who have not. Some of us would say that markets are not always the best solution for addressing our problems, especially when it comes to the needs and hopes that all citizens have in a country. Can we be both innovative in our business practices while fostering some goodwill and civic virtue? Are we a collection of rugged individualists trying to advance our own causes and maximize our ROI, or are we a part of a larger community, a commonwealth, to use an old-fashioned term? Are we a part of a commonwealth in which we recognize the need and obligation we have to support and care for one another? Here in the 21st century, here in 2020, this highly unusual and challenging year, the stakes are high, and they are getting higher. I pray that we will be open to the opportunities for service that bring us together rather than tear us apart. May it be so. Amen. wherever you may be sitting or standing and watching this right now, I invite you to take a breath and join with me in a brief time of prayer. Gracious and Holy One, Creator of all things, Creator of emptiness and space, we come to you full of much that clutters and distracts, of so many streams and screens that stifle, of so many news stories that burden us, so many initiatives and agendas that can make us a burden to others. Gracious Spirit, empty us now of gnawing dissatisfactions, of anxious imaginings, of fretful preoccupations. Empty us of nagging prejudices, of old scores to settle, and of the arrogance of being right. Empty us of the ways that we unthinkingly think of ourselves as powerless or as a victim, as determined by age or race or sex, as being less than we are or other than yours. Hollow out in us a space in which we can find ourselves, a space in which we can find peace and a whole heart, a space in which we can find a forgiving spirit and some holiness, where we can find the springs of laughter and the will to reach boldly for abundant life, for ourselves and for the whole human family. In addition, I invite you to join with me in saying together the prayer that Jesus taught us to pray, saying together, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Many of us have inquired about how we can support First Parish Church and our work here around the region, especially when we are not gathered here on Sundays in person. You can do so by, 1, mailing a check to the church office. That works well. 2, logging into your bank account online and setting up a one-time or periodic donation to First Parish Church in Weston. That's my personal favorite. Or 3, by using our PayPal account. And the easiest way to do that is to have a PayPal account yourself. And then search on our office email address, admin@firstparishweston.org, and we will pop up as an authorized recipient. Regardless of the option you choose, we are grateful to you, the members and friends of this congregation, for continuing to support our church's voice and presence and work and mission. What we do here, even from a distance, matters, and it's worthy of our support.
For all saints who from their labors rest, who lead by faith before the world confess, thy name, O Jesus, be forever blessed. Hallelujah. mercies, Lord, eternal truth attends thy word. Thy grace shall sound from shore to shore, till sun shall rise and set no more. Amen.
Thank you for joining us for our service today. We invite you to check out upcoming gatherings and programs, including our virtual fellowship hour that begins at 11:30 a.m. or right there just after on Zoom today. There are links to all of our online meetings in the e-newsletter that was sent out on Friday and on the calendar page of our website. This week, we are hosting several regular virtual meetings and programs. They include our Knitters and Stitchers group that meets on Mondays, 12 noon on Zoom. Our Wednesday morning meditation program that meets at 8:30 a.m. on Zoom. Our podcast chat and check-in with the minister that is on Thursdays at 4 p.m. There's information in the order service and on our website about that. Also, our book group, as I noted, will be meeting this coming Thursday morning, November 19th at 9:30 a.m. on Zoom as well. In addition, I just want to note that we continue to receive food donations to benefit the Weston Council on Aging Food Pantry. There is information in the order service on our website about that. You can drop off bags or boxes of food at the breezeway entrance to the church or at the entrance to the church office here on Church Street. Finally, I just want to note that on Wednesday, November 25th, we will be serving our Thanksgiving dinner of sorts at the Bristol Lodge. There's information in the order service about that, and including the opportunity to help out and prepare part of that dinner. Finally, I want to just send out or reiterate the invitation for readers and performers for next week's reading of the Thanksgiving Day Proclamation. We are looking for 3 more people, 3 more families who'd be willing to record a short section of the Thanksgiving Proclamation at home on your phone or iPad or recording device, and then send it to us. Just email me or the church office, and we can send you the script and give you the directions. It's very easy, and it's a fun way to participate from a distance in one of our services. Finally, I'd like to thank Lynn Taff for making the arrangements for our special floral decoration on our altar this morning. These flowers are in celebration of the Indian festival and holiday of Diwali, the festival of lights that close to 1 billion people are celebrating yesterday and today this weekend. Diwali is a time when Indians come together and they light diyas, or these little candles, and they spread marigolds, and they celebrate the triumph of light over darkness. What a wonderful, wonderful theme for this time of year. We continue to find many ways that we can celebrate and be supportive as a community from a distance. I'm gratified to see so many of you stepping up and supporting our efforts here during such a difficult time. That's what churches like this one do. Thank you for joining us this day. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord keep all those whom you love, whether here or in some other place. May God be your companion, and you be God's friend as you walk together through all the days of your life. And at the journey's end, may you find the welcome of God's love. It keeps us all. Amen.